Thank you so, so much. The first thing that we'd love to share with you tonight is actually a video that PRH put together to explain the life of a book, to take you from a Word document or a Google Doc that you've typed through to what you see on the shelf behind me. Pat, can you play that video for us, please?
The publishing process begins when an agent submits a manuscript and the editor decides to acquire it. In most cases, this is through an auction, where interested publishing houses place competing bids. This can be a long process, and the agent is integral to the negotiation.
As an editor, there's that moment when you are reading a submission and things just start to click. You've got to have it. It's not just that you love it, but you have a vision for it and you want to tell everyone about it. Yes, there is a market calculus to be performed, but the first step is feeling the passion and being able to message that to your colleagues and back to the author and agent.
When I'm looking to acquire, what I need to find is someone who has a true voice for children, really writes naturally from a child's point of view in a plain, direct way, and it is really a rare talent.
Once the major points of the deal are confirmed between the author, agent, and editor, the contracts team puts together a final agreement using the standard company boilerplate. This includes the advance, royalties, foreign rights, and audio rights. Then the editorial process begins in earnest as the editor works closely with the author to hone the story. The editor may make suggested changes about storylines and character development, language, or structure. This will often involve a back and forth between the editor and author that includes lengthy edit letters as well as line-level edits.
Every author is different and every author wants to work in a different way. Some authors want to go away in a cave somewhere and write 100,000 words and then come back with 100,000 words and not be disturbed while they do that. Other writers need to have every page essentially checked over, read, and sort of assessed so that they can move forward. And so the first thing I do is try to work out a system that will work for both of us.
Each project requires something different, but I think the one thing that is consistent across all projects is that my job as an editor is to understand what the author is truly trying to say. And I see that as like extracting the truth from them. And that might mean helping them solidify what's on the page, but it might also mean asking them the right questions so that I can get at the issue that's truly in the back of their mind, but maybe hasn't made it out to the front yet.
The managing editorial team keeps the book on schedule by routing the edited manuscript through both copy editing and proofreading. Copy editors check for grammatical mistakes, consistency, and clarity while the manuscript is still in Word document form. The proofreader then reviews the final designed and formatted pages of the book before it goes to print, checking for any lingering errors in the typeset version of the manuscript.
Our job is to hear their voice and to take their prose and over the course of the copy editing and proofreading process to just make every author's book be the best possible version of itself that it can be.
While the book is being edited, the designers get to work on the cover and interior. Collaborating with the editor and author to understand the ultimate vision for the book, the designer creates the cover art and selects the interior layout and font. The design can go through several drafts before the editor approves the final version.
One of the first things we do is meet with our authors to decide what the visual program's going to be, the thing that's going to complement their text, the things that's going to set the style for the book, and we set the tone for what the brand of that book's going to be.
But print books are not the only types of books we create at Penguin Random House. Our cutting-edge audiobook and ebook teams transform stories into digital and audio platforms for all different devices.
When we produce an audiobook, it's not just what's on the page. We're producing an experience. We have a team of producers who are assigned a number of titles, and they spend all their time reading these books, collaborating with the author to make sure that the voice they have in that book is what comes out in the audiobook at the end of the day.
We're working very closely with all of the platform developers and their R&D teams to figure out what is the best use of that and what is the best use as they're developing new technologies.
Almost think the colleague of mine whose voice is recording the video. That's basically how it all happens. But we are here with some actual professionals who are going to give you more than just that one piece of the puzzle, what happens within the publishing house. Tonight, we have some of the most brilliant professionals in the biz joining us to zoom out to a 30,000-foot view to lend context on the environment in which this all takes place. So our Publishing 101 session is going to give you a primer on this world. And in the weeks ahead, I promise that we'll get into the deeper details of how to get your own story out there. So, here we are. I would love to invite our panelists to join us on screen. Starting with Jamia Wilson, Vice President and Executive Editor at Random House. And prior to joining Random House, having served as Executive Director and Publisher of the Feminist Press at the City University of New York. Jamia is a published author herself, writing for both adults and children, and an award-winning lecturer and activist whose work on both sides of the editorial desk has inspired and informed. Thank you for being here with us, Jamia.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay, and joining us is Matthew Schwartz, SVP and Director of Digital Strategy, which is an expansive role in a company that transitioned to having ebooks as a format and online retailers as prominent customers and platforms for our titles on his watch, when honestly, many of our executives may have still been handwriting important messages and parts of our process were unquestionably analog. Thank you for bringing your brilliance to the space and world building we're doing here, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Phoebe Yeh is Vice President and Publisher at the children's imprint Crown Books for Young Readers. Phoebe's list of picture books and YA and middle grade fiction and nonfiction includes groundbreaking authors like Nick Stone, Patricia Park, Kevin Hart, Mahogany L. Brown, and Phoebe's influential leadership at Penguin Random House cannot be overstated. Thank you so much, Phoebe, for joining us tonight.
I'm delighted to be with everyone.
And Tyne Hunter is Director of Comic Market Sales at Penguin Random House and oversees our newly created sales team servicing the direct comic market. Tyne has worked closely with our internal sales, operations, finance teams on all aspects of integration, logistics, and communication to thousands of comic shops across the country. Tyne's decades of experience in the business advocating for diverse content and storytellers, especially in specialty retail outlets and communities, and genre publishing like sci-fi, fantasy, graphic novels, comics, makes her so perfect to be with us tonight. Thank you, Tyne, for coming. And honestly, I learned so much from each of you individually, and I know tonight will not be any different. And I mentioned him earlier, but I'd like to make sure I spotlight Grant Greg-Glack, our Senior Director of Consumer Insights, and one of the driving forces behind this event. He's graciously managing our interactive elements, so please, and I think you've all been doing this great, use the Q&A feature for questions you'd like us to answer, and the chat is our community space for celebrating what we're hearing. I hope we're celebrating. So, without further ado, the video took us through all that this happens at the publishing house. And we're going to step over to cover the bigger picture, which is the different types of publishers who would be interested in publishing your work. Jamia, because of your experience with so many of these types of publishers, may I ask you to talk us through this? What advantage do you think that independent, specialized academic presses have to offer an author above and beyond what we do at the Big Five, or just your POV?
Thank you so much for asking me this question. I always have friends who ask me questions about feeling like they need to demystify the process. There's such an opportunity to go a lot of different places and they're not sure exactly what the right fit for them is. And I always say that finding the right publisher for you is the most important thing, and to really think about what the goals of your book are, because there is the right publishing fit for the goals that you're trying to meet, and having had the experience of working now at 2 different kinds of publishers, but also publishing in mid-sized independent publisher, publishing on the UK side, the US side, and also publishing with an imprint on the Penguin side, I have had the experience now, and also on the Random House side, as an author, I've had the experience now of getting to see what the strengths are of each model. And so what I really like to say is most important is to understand that you have choices. It's okay to do your homework and to explore, think about discerningly, what is it that you're looking for in your book? What is the right publisher for the audience you're seeking to reach? And really understand the basic economics and rights consideration of every publication route you want to go. So I often will hear people say, well, I know for sure I want to do self or indie self publishing, depending on how you call it. And I love that entrepreneurial spirit, but I also know that there's some people who say, well, I want to do that, but I don't necessarily want to do the registration of copyright by myself, or I don't want to do some of the other administration. And so for those folks, I will point them in the direction of learning more about, if they want a more hands-on experience, learning more about hybrid models as well, and academic models that would have them be able to be a part of that. So what I think is you have a good opportunity ahead of you either way, if you decide to go to self-publish, independent publish, or work with a larger publisher. But understanding the landscape helps, and really understanding who you want to reach, who you want to have access to your book, and then also what format aligns with your vision, your finances, and your objectives. And I say this because sometimes people don't also realize what the financial considerations are on each side, to really think with a long view, because books are a long view object and format. Takes generally sometimes 18 months or longer for a book to hit the marketplace. So it's important to really think about that. And if you're deciding to go into academic, there are also other kinds of considerations, for example, where you have to have peer reviews and double blind processes that take a lot longer for your book to meet its readers. So those are some of the things that I think are important to think about. And there's pros and considerations on either side. And for people who feel as if they want to have something come out sooner than a 12 to an 8 month process, for example, then I say, oh, you might want to go look at one of the scrappier models. But for the people who say, I want to get this book to the widest readership possible, if they have a goal that they want to have a book that is sold to the widest readership with translations in multiple languages, then I'll say it's likely best that you would go for a big 5 deal. And each of those decisions will be personal. And the other thing I'd like to say too is, this is an industry where life is long. You'll hear that a lot from people in the industry, but you can try all the things. I have not had a straight line in publishing. So I'll just say I've tried all the things and have seen that there are some things that I have done that were fitting into each of these different buckets. And that is okay too. And to just be really clear about setting up your options and having conversations with your care team, as I like to call it, your agent, or whoever else you have on your team, to think about how you might make that possible for yourself and your journey.
I love that. A care team. I'm definitely going to use that. Phoebe, can I ask, how do you talk about the variety of publishers to potential authors? And how do you reply when people say things like, oh, I think my book has to be published at Random House in order for it to be a success?
So one of the things I suggest to authors is, I know they're very into their writing or in their illustration work, but it is always a good idea to know what is out there. You know, which authors do you read? Which illustrators do you admire and why? And it's a good idea to know if they are represented, because maybe that can give you some guidelines. It can be a little bit complex, but I think that kind of research, I think that's one of the things that sometimes people don't realize, because you're thinking about your craft and, you know, your creativity, but ultimately, if you want to publish, whether you self-publish or you publish with a company, it's a business, and we want to create beautiful books for the readership, but we have to make money. So that is going to go into the mix at some point. And I think Jemima raised some very legitimate points about, trying to figure out, and you don't have to do it all on your own, but what is the best place? Penguin Random House might be the best place for your work, or maybe self-publishing is the best way to go. Certainly, especially in the children's space, a lot of people some of you may know Pete the Cat. That was online first, and then somebody at Harper figured it out. And it is not alone. I don't know I feel there's some adult examples too of somebody self-published, Random House picked up on Yale James, and the rest is publishing history. So I also encourage people to think about representation, because part of the agent's job is to help you navigate and to make, that the agent, that is what they are supposed to know how to do, how to match an author to an editor at a particular house, that if they are doing their homework, they can propose some very good partnerships. So, it's very exciting that there is so much publishing, and there's not just one way to do it. And I think tonight you'll hear in some instances, I got to say, children's deviates a little bit from adult, but in this instance, I think it's very similar.
Thank you for that, Phoebe. And you gave something that's a piece of advice I do tend to give to a lot of writers who are just starting out and trying to figure out which of these. Is it a big five, a house that is a general trade publisher, just publishing a wide variety of books, or one of the independents that has a more carefully curated list, and a little more flexibility, the specialized and technical publishers who are, largely scholarly. And then the academic presses, which, depending, some are regional, University of Virginia Press, publishing books that are rooted in, Jefferson history and Charlottesville and Virginia life, or, a Harvard University Press, things that have business school elements. Publishers are specific to those spaces as well. One of the things I say is look at what other titles would sit alongside yours on a shelf. Think about who your comparative titles are, and then see which imprints are publishing those titles. And that gives you a sense of where your book might live best, what teams might be best able to support you. Tyne, as I think about the teams that support you at some of these publishers, might you be able to shed some light on how these teams are different, or different in how they sell through the titles on their list?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to remember is that for every publisher category or type, there is a market that appeals. So at PRH, our sales division is comprised of independent bookstores, national bookstore chains, international sales, online, airport, mass merch, and of course, specialty, which I will say is the best if I do say so myself, because I'm in special markets. And so at PRH, our in-house publishers are part of the big five, as you see on the screen. But through our distribution arm, we also sell a wide array of publishers, including those who fall under each of these categories. I also want to point out that you can have a big five publisher that can publish an independent book. You can have an independent publisher that publishes a massive bestseller. You can have an independent publisher that publishes a book that is specialized and appeals to a tech market. So it's not quite so pigeonholed. You find that there's always a market. There's always going to be a market that appeals. In publishing, Special Markets is focused on selling books to non-traditional markets. So a special market account can include premium literacy accounts. It can include national specialty retailers. We always use the example of when you think of a specialty retailer, Urban Outfitters is a great one. It can include museums. It can include education retailers, gift stores, and of course, comic shops, and so much more. So with so many different types of accounts, we are adept at finding the perfect book for each one. We know that it can come from any type of publisher. Books are not the primary merchandise for most specialty accounts. So we're focused on curation and partnership building so that books become an opportunity area within their merchandise assortment and a growth driver. Portia, you're muted.
Thanks. Matt, how does the distinction between these publisher types show up in your world and in an online space? Do all of these publishers now publish in all formats? Are these considerations people should keep in mind?
I mean, let's look at it this way. I mean, online, certainly, when you're looking at online retail, the nice thing is that online has definitely leveled the playing field in terms of any book being available, right? So certainly, as you all know, whether you're self-publishing or whether you're a big publisher or a small publisher, your books can easily be available at all major online retailers. And that's great. I mean, in general, the consumer does not really care what name is listed in the small print under publisher. It's just not the way consumers think. Obviously, there are certain brands and certain genres, especially, that may carry some weight with readers of that genre. But I mean, 99% of the time, it's not really important to consumers. I think, obviously, I think that while books may be available at every online retail, regardless of the publisher, different publishers will have different relationships with online retailers. And I mean, bigger publishers may have, certain ways of promoting their books that are not always the same ways as a smaller publisher may have. So it varies. But again, I don't want to pretend that there's only one way to do it or that one way is the right way. I mean, frankly, if anytime, the more someone tells you that there's only one way to do something, the more you should not listen to them, especially in publishing. But I think I think when it comes to ebook, physical books, and audio, in general, most publishers tend to especially produce ebooks and physical together. The main reason for this is that ebooks in this day and age are not especially too difficult to produce. Audio, obviously for Penguin Random House and many other publishers, they also can produce their own audio, but it's a much more complex affair. And there are certain publishers that focus just in audio. And it's not uncommon sometimes in some cases, for audio rights to be split separately. But I do think more and more you're seeing all formats, coming out of the same place, which, just makes it easier in some ways for a marketing team, a publicity team to really get behind a title, right? I mean, I think in general, when you're promoting a book, you're not saying, well, how do we promote this ebook? How do we promote this paperback? How do we promote this audio? In a perfect world, you're saying, how do we promote the book? How do we reach the reader, regardless of how they want to read it? How do we just reach that reader? And sometimes when those formats are together under one house, it makes it a little easier for everyone to kind of synergize their strategies around it and just help work towards the greater good of the title as a whole, regardless of how the likely readers of that book would necessarily want to experience it.
Thank you for that, Matt. You reminded me of something that our former president and publisher, Gina, used to say: when all formats live in one place, then we get to say we're publishing in any format the reader chooses. It is that same book, but that a reader gets to select what their experience is instead of making that selection for them by only releasing the one or the other. And I thought about it. Thank you. Phoebe, you nodded to this, and I almost skipped ahead to get to this readership slide, because this certainly is one of those driving forces behind the differentiation between the types of publishers. Would it be fair to say that those publisher types are distinguished because of how they relate to readers, they serve readers? I know when I work with folks on book proposals, one of the most stressful questions seems to be, who's the audience for your book? Time, can I ask, in your part of the biz, how do you talk about readers, and what is helpful for you to know about reader behavior when you're pitching a book to your clients?
Absolutely. I love this question. We're always thinking about readers, albeit in more ways than you probably think. We focus not just on what they're reading, but the methods through which they discover and engage with titles. I think that's a really crucial point. Let's use a customer who shops at Williams-Sonoma. That's a special markets account. We'll use that as an example. Someone who is going into Williams-Sonoma isn't expressly looking for a book, but they'll walk in and they'll see a copy of Cooking Jubilee, merchandise with pots, pans, seasonings, etc., and that becomes a shopping moment. The book is merchandised in such a way that it speaks to their larger interests. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to provide curation for our accounts that allows us to provide titles that speak to their customers' interests. Thereby with interest and discovery. It's about recognizing that there's not one size fits all for a type of account or reader. The reader who shops at a comic shop may be the same person who's shopping at Target or Barnes & Nobles, but they may not be looking for the same type of content at each store. We provide insights on what we know is trending in genres, formats, etc. And we really curate our list to the account needs and what their customers are looking to experience at their store.
Very brilliantly stated, Time. Thank you. Matt, you've seen a lot of changes in how we talk about readers and how we listen to readers. Why do you think that's a stressful question for folks to answer? Like, who is your reader and what could make that easier?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really necessarily think it's should necessarily be on the writer's plate to always know who their reader is. And in fact, I think there's a lot of writers who may think their reader is one person, but maybe another. I mean, I think the reason it's stressful is that it is, it feels, to me, any conversation where you're talking about great generalizations is stressful to begin with. And as someone like myself who reads a lot of genre, when I hear that this is what fantasy readers want, or this is what romance readers want, I'm like, you're wrong, that's not me. So I think the answer is, but the thing is that those trends exist, right? So I think the way that we need to make that less stressful is to acknowledge that one size does not fit all, and that basically it's okay to acknowledge trends while still acknowledging that not everyone in that group is going to fit that. And it's also important to acknowledge that a single book may have many different audiences and may not fit any specific existing trend. And so I think it's good to take that information about kind of what we're seeing maybe fans of biographies like, or fans of romance novels like, and understand that, but not view it as concrete rules about the book has to be this or the reader has to be this, because I think once you go down that road, you're just making it, I think you're putting a huge burden on both the reader and the publisher to kind of fit an existing mold. And I think when you're talking about art, which books are, you just have to acknowledge that not everything is always going to fit into that mold.
And that was a bold statement, that it's actually not necessarily up to the writer to determine who their reader is. I think that's fascinating. Jamia, can you shed some light on that and maybe think about or share about how understanding audience might influence the choices someone makes about the publisher they want to work with?
I love that. And I love the bold statement, because as an editor, I can speak from the books that I'm drawn to, and the books I'm drawn to as a reader. I really think of myself as the frontline editor, the frontline reader for the audience. I think with integrity about that, to think, oh, I see things through a lens, and I have to be aware of the places where this lens is limited, and the places where this lens is expansive, and to think about how getting an expansive sense of what the readership might be is really important, and also integral to seeing the promise for the artist and the author who you're working with. So for me, voice is the thing that is at the core of what draws me to whether or not I want to pursue. If I can't stop thinking about a voice, that's something that I know is going to be something I need to explore, and that I need to determine how I'm going to make it my book on my list. It's an interesting thing, because I'm thinking about Hafiza Jeter, who is an amazing author and literary agent. And when I read The Black Period, which was my first book here at Random House, I went around to everyone in the team and I just said, Hafiza is to writing literary work what Ornette Coleman was to jazz. And I have to work with her. For any jazz heads in the audience, I'm saying that because I thought there's no one else who could seek to imitate that voice, and we will figure out the rest. And for me, I think that also translates to audience because of the richness of her writing, because of the various journeys that she's traveled through her life and the things she's thinking through in a book that defies genre. She's expanding the audience by basis of creating an expansive book with an expansive lens. So I'm very attracted to projects that challenge our imaginations to think bigger about who an audience is, and challenge our imaginations to think bigger about ideas and theories and who might be able to be connected to them. And Hafiza's book ended up winning multiple awards, and I'm really excited about it. I knew they would, because this is a voice that puts itself into your cells and it becomes part of you. So I think that that's really important. And the thing that I also really think is important is to think about who will see themselves in the book. That's something I think about a lot every time I think about a project. Who will see themselves affirmed through this storytelling? And it doesn't mean that they have to have the exact same identity as the writer. It just means that through empathy, connection, humanity, through story, or through experience, or through systems that are being talked about, a human being will feel less alone because they read it. And that to me translates to a wide readership as well.
So beautifully stated. Thank you, Jamia. Phoebe, also as a publisher, can you give me an example of a proposal you acquired, one, either because of the voice and then the reader didn't matter and you were able to go out and find the reader? Thank you for that, Jamia. Or proposals that you may have acquired because the author was so clear on who the audience was, but also how to reach them, to point to what Tyne said, they knew where readers were going to find out about the kind of book they were writing?
Well, I've just been waiting for my chance to talk because I think my little example is going to reinforce what we have heard from the other three panelists just now. I'm going to tell you about Nick Stone. So just a little background history. I have been in children's publishing, only children's publishing, for 38 years. And I was asked to come to Random House to help revitalize an imprint. So that meant I was pretty much starting from scratch, right? Because I needed to work with debut authors, people who had not published because, you know, they didn't need me to work with existing authors because they were already publishing very well at Random House. So I needed to find new talent. And so the story about Nick Stone, you can see her first novel on my little background screen. The title is Dear Martin. That is not the book her agent sent me. And in fact, there's a piece by Nick in the Times that makes reference to her most recent book, Chaos Theory. That was actually the manuscript I got. And it was about a girl who has a mental health diagnosis. And for various reasons, I could not pursue that book. But this is what I said to Nick's agent. I said, you know, there is only one other author who writes dialogue like this, and it is Walter Dean Myers. Some of you may know this name. I was lucky. I got to work with Walter for 20 years. And as I was reading the Chaos Theory manuscript, I said, oh, I can't offer for this book, but she can write dialogue like Walter, and he was the best at it. So I said to the agent, what else is Nick working on? And she was very astute. She started describing the premise of Dear Martin. And the whole idea is Nick, some of you may know, she's from Atlanta. And especially if you are born and raised in Atlanta, Dr. King means something beyond what everybody else in the country learns about the civil rights movement. But Nick had really come to feel that all kinds of people were appropriating Dr. King. And so her idea was to write a novel about a teen who, you know, he knows Dr. King is no longer with us, but he's writing to Dr. King and saying, hey, you know, I'm not sure what you said back in the day is relevant to what is happening in my life. And I just felt that this was a really fresh new idea for a book in which Dr. King's writings plays a role. And I was really excited. So I said, you know, oh, let me see that. And of course, I was not told that basically that's all Nick had. But, you know, a couple weeks later, I got a proposal, I got sample chapters. And because I had read the manuscript that I wasn't going to buy, I knew Nick could write an entire book. And that's how she got her first 2-book deal. And it's been quite the ride since, but she had voice. And soon thereafter, we realized that she had a way of reaching out to readers. I mean, we didn't really know this about her, but I could just tell from the writing. And ever since, every single reader who has come to me has said, it's when you read a book by Nick, it's like you're in the room with her characters. They're like talking to you. And I said, yes, I understand. And that's because she gets kids and she knows. And like, that's the other thing too. She is a woman writer, but so many of her protagonists are actually teen boys, which not everyone can do that. But I'll save that bit for later. But that's one example. I admit in children's, it might be a little bit different where we really, because of other reasons, we want to read the entire manuscript because we have to know that you can write 250 pages and you can finish the book. Oftentimes, you know, everybody reworks the first 50 pages and never finishes. So.
Thank you for that, Phoebe. Actually, you prompted me to go a little off of our prepared notes here, just to talk about that. What actually does get submitted to you? Everyone, we will have 2 entire sessions, one devoted just to editors and what they are looking for, and one to agents and how to reach them, how to query them. But we have 2 publishers in the house. And so, Phoebe, you kind of put us in here. Do you always, in evaluating children's books, minus Nick Steele, who did give you a full novel at first in Chaos Theory, is that what you need in order to evaluate projects? Or are you evaluating on proposals? You need full manuscripts, partials? And once you have answered, Jamia, if you can tell me that from your POV in the adult world, I'd love to know.
So let's start with Crown is a super, super small imprint. And, you know, that's having worked with big teams elsewhere. I really wanted to just be myself and an assistant. And because of that, you know, we actually can't take as many risks. I would say 10 years ago when I started here, I was like, yeah, you know, just proposal and sample chapters. And especially with debut authors, I no longer say, I mean, I acknowledge I have lost books because I either wanted to see a revision to make sure we were all on the same page and the author was capable of making the revisions, or, you know, we went into auction and other editors were willing to acquire just on the strength of synopsis and 3 chapters. I mean, the truth is I learned the hard way, right? So, because I've been burnt before, now I have to read it can be rough. And Nick, if she was in the room, she would say, oh my gosh, Phoebe, help me cut Dear Martin in half. I have to read the whole thing. But every editor, every publisher has a different opinion on this. So not to be unhelpful, but many ways to do this.
Very helpful indeed. And Phoebe, is that for picture books and YA and middle grade, or is that only for chapter books?
Well, what I would say, picture books are really short relative to the length of a novel. So we would expect, sometimes I'm a little shocked. I get a query letter about a picture book. Can I send you a query letter? I'm just like, send me the manuscript, because really it should be about 5 pages. So I do want to see whether for whatever age, complete manuscript.
Thank you, Phoebe. Jamia?
So, it really depends. I would say my preference is more, is what I like to say. The more you give me, the more I know about your vision, the more I know about how you write, your voice, and the more I know about where you can go. Even if I have structural questions, or I might see it differently on the face before we would have a meeting, or have another discussion about what's possible, I like to engage with as much material as I can get. And one of the reasons I think that it works in the favor of the author to give me more is because otherwise, if there is something that I'm intrigued about and I feel it's a bit reductive, I don't have enough, I start to go to Google and I start looking because I'm curious and I'm compelled. And, sometimes that's really great, because then I just think, oh, I want to talk to this person. And then usually then I have that meeting and I'll say, can I have more? Can I have more sample chapters? Can I have some more writing? Can I see where you go with this? But it's been interesting to me, because I sometimes think in conversations I've had with folks who feel that me asking for more means that there's some sort of critique of the material or critique of what I think they can do, when in fact it's a curiosity to say, hey, there's enough that has captured my attention. I want to see what the full vision is. I want to see what the arc and the trajectory is according to you right now, so we can really get in there and talk about possibilities. So I definitely think that I'm traditional in the sense that I like to have a full proposal with 3 sample chapters at least. If it's fiction, I love to have as close to the final manuscript as I can get. And if you can't give me that, I want to know major plot points, how it's going to end. I need to know how it's going to end. And the heart of what you think the through line is. And sometimes I think that people are stymied by feeling as if, oh, if I give too much, maybe they won't want it. And I've talked to people who've been close loved ones about that, when I'll say, oh, I actually couldn't move on that because I received a synopsis and a bunch of links to your op-eds. And if I'd had a full proposal on the idea to see through what you were going to do, it would have been something we could pursue. So I just want to encourage you, give us more lovingly, please. Give me things to parse through. I will read them.
Thank you for saying that, Jamia. I'm going to advance us to how readers get in touch with writers way, and that is through our booksellers. Tyne, as our sales director in the house, can we start with you on this one? And I ask, what do you think potential writers should understand about how books make their way into a bookstore? And for writers just getting started, what can they learn by browsing the shelves at their local bookstores?
A lot. I think the biggest thing for writers to know is that PRH, there is a massive amount of people working to bring your books to the market. Most writers know their editor, their agent, and their publicity contact. But they may not know that there are also production managers, copy editors, managing editors, sales reps, marketing managers, both digital and traditional, customer service reps, customer operations, analysts, fulfillment teams, and so much more. And they're all focused on bringing books to stores. That is literally what we get up and do. For new writers, browsing your local bookstore is key. Go into a shop, as many as you can across the country. Go into an independent bookstore, go into a national bookstore, a Barnes & Nobles or a Books A Million. Go into an airport bookstore. Go into a specialty store. Go into as many as you can, and see what other authors are in your genre, what they're publishing, how the books are displayed, what's in the acknowledgments, etc. I'd also say social media influencers. Book Talk is an incredible engine for discoverability and engagement. Colleen Hoover is a great example of an author who was self-publishing and got a hit on Book Talk and found a massive growth through social media. It's not just about following your favorite authors, it's also about engaging with readers and influencers. I think one of the things is so often you are siloed into just thinking that you need to focus on your own niche. And that's true, but you also want to see what else is going on in your niche and what's trending and what's working, and go from there.
Thank you, Tyne. That takes me to a question I have for you, Matt. Are there correlations between reader demographics or interests and personas and the types of bookstores they shop at?
Oh, I mean, every bookstore or big box store, I mean, I think they're all going to have, you know, kind of slightly differing demographics and readership in some cases. I mean, I don't know so much if it's something to obsess over. And I think it's important to remember that some of these bookstores listed here have a very curated selection of books, meaning they carry very few books as opposed to others which carry almost all books. And even if you wrote a book that wasn't carried by a place that's curated, it doesn't mean it has anything to do with your book being wrong or anything like that. Really, the more different bookstores that exist and the more different audiences they cater to, that just provides more avenues for a sales team to go in and maximize your sales. So, I mean, I do think it's important to remember that, like, you're looking at these as opportunities, but you're not necessarily looking at a place that doesn't have a book as something was wrong with the book. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Thank you, Matt. Phoebe, how would you explain the difference in approach and selection from, say, a big box store like Target versus a traditional store like B&N or an indie like McNally Jackson?
So, to those of us gathered together, think about what makes you decide to go to a store like Target. What is on your shopping list? It's probably not, unfortunately, to buy, the new novel by Raquel Palacio or something. It's probably you're going to Target because you are picking up a clothing item, or I don't know, some sort of I'm trying to think what's the last thing I bought at Target, but you know what I mean. And Matt, I think both Matt and Tyne clearly stated that there's also only so much space, right? So like you think about your Target and think about the size of the book section at Target, then think about your indie, or think about Barnes & Noble, a store like that, and the amount of space. Now, I know Barnes & Noble has had some changes recently, but still, most likely, if you're going to Barnes & Noble, you're going to buy a book, and there's just more shelf space for more books. So that's, what we try to do, and really this applies, I think, across the board, is every single book on our list, we're trying to figure out, where's it going to sell? How many copies is Amazon going to commit to? How many copies will B&N, offer for? And just try to do it. And like, is this book one that is going to start at the indies first and hopefully expand? Is this book going to live at Target? You won't be surprised, like holiday books, especially for children, even though every store carries some holiday titles, clearly at Target or a grocery store, there's a little more opportunity. But even so, very limited space. So all of that goes into the mix. And of course, we rely on Tyne and her colleagues to help handhold us and make sure that the right number of books is going to each sales channel. And it is totally fine. Like, luckily we are large, so we want to have a book for every reading taste.
Thank you for that, Phoebe. And Jamia, do you think indie retailers matter as much as Costco or Walmart?
Absolutely. So I am a big fan of indie retailers. When I was at Feminist Press, we would also sell books out of our office. So in addition to being a publisher, that was inside, it's in this CUNY Graduate Center, which used to be the B. Altman department store. If you watch Miss Maisel, that is the department store she worked in the cosmetic aisle at. And so we would from time to time have people come in and want to get a tour in the history of the press and then want to look at our books and buy our books, and we would give them the catalog. And so I had a lot of experience as a retailer hand selling books to readers. And I think about that every day as an editor. It gave me such a great experience going to different events and festivals, hand selling books, to the point where I still have the habit of, depending on who you talk to, either endearing or obnoxious, hand selling books to people that I see next to me in the bookstore, because I always want to match people with their favorite books. And so because I had that experience, it gave me just a deeper appreciation for the hard work that indie retailers put in. It is a business of passion, and they are curators. Indie retailers are curators. They are passionate. They are dealing with a lot of the impact of the post-COVID-19 landscape, and getting and distributing books to people in different ways, making sure that communities get what they need. And they really, really are the heartbeat of our communities. And there's such great research too about what having a bookstore can mean to a community. So it's something that I like to do. And I personally try as much as I can to frequent the independent booksellers in my community, be a part of their events, but also to buy specifically from communities who are marginalized, who own bookstores. So I frequent some Black, Asian, and Latinx owned bookstores here in New York. And there's one I love uptown because the women who own it share my last name. But I would say that it's also just a really big part of being a good literary citizen and building beloved community. And people at the bookstore, sort of like the librarians who I feel helped raise me, are people who, once you get to know them, will also want to always match you with the book you need in the moment you need it.
One of my favorite terms, literary citizens. Time?
Can I chime in really quickly? Because I think Jamia had a really great point that I think is worth piggybacking on. Your local independent bookstore is, in a lot of ways, they're the ones who are going to hand sell your book. They're the ones, when you partner with them, they're the ones who will host an event for you. They're the ones who are committed to really engaging and broadening their reach, because they're community centers. I say the same thing for comic shops when I'm talking to graphic novel and comic creators. Your local shop, whether it be a comic shop or an independent bookstore, it is always crucial to engage with them, because they really are the epicenter of their local communities, and they are willing to be doing things on so many different spectrums. I've seen independent bookstores and comic shops that'll do festivals, and they'll have tables that, partner with their local schools and libraries. And so I think it is always crucial to really partner with them and to really build that as a network. So I just wanted to call out, because I think Jamia made an excellent point with that.
Thank you very, very much, Time. There's a question that I have for both you and for Phoebe as we talk about those folks who will be real champions for your work. And I'm thinking not just about booksellers, but teachers and librarians. And I know that especially in the children's space, they are just as influential as booksellers are. Would either of you want to tell us a little more about that and how writers cultivate those kinds of relationships?
So in children's, think about it, right? Because up until the age of 12, online, we are not allowed to be in touch, and we should not be in touch with children. But if you are in the children's publishing business, that's a big segment of our reading population. So we have to reach the kids either through their caregivers, right? The parents, their educators, and their librarians. And really, when you look at the history of children's bookmaking in in the US, the librarians have had a huge impact on what the children are reading, what awards are given. The most prestigious award in children's publishing, one is the Caldecott Best Illustrated Book of the Year, and the other is the Newbery Best Written Novel of the year, or rather, best work. I think it could also be given to nonfiction. And it really impacts not only sales, but what books are being taught to children. So we are hugely affected by how teachers and librarians feel about the books we are publishing, because it makes a huge difference to what is being purchased and what the children are reading. You know, those of you who have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews who have been through the school system, really anywhere, you know, children are reading and we encourage children to read, but how do you know what they should be reading? And it's because of this reliance on select educators, select librarians, and committees that have a series of criteria that they follow really carefully and they look at yearly in determining what they feel are the best books written and illustrated for children. And you've heard me say it earlier tonight, you know, because it affects sales, it's something that goes into the mix, you know. These days too, with the way school systems are able to purchase books, oftentimes it's a function of how the books are reviewed, and oftentimes librarians in schools are only allowed to purchase books if a book has received starred reviews. So there's this whole system that we live and breathe by in order to be successful publishers.
Thank you, Phoebe. Ryan, is there anything else you'd want to add to that?
I think the biggest thing is that I love librarians. I grew up in libraries. As a kid, I was not allowed to go home by myself, and my mother would make me go walk to the neighborhood library and stay there until she got off work to pick me up. So libraries are my happy space. But I think what's wonderful is I don't think a lot of people know just how much, and I think Phoebe hit the nail on the head. A lot of people don't know just how much librarians make books. I think a great example of that is the graphic novel category, right? So kids' graphic novels are a major growth area in publishing. And what I love about them is that, you know, they are something that traditionally most people in the past would think, oh, you know, they're not really books, they're not real books. But we've actually seen that with children, they are perfect for kids who may be resistant or hesitant to read. They are more likely to pick up a graphic novel, they're more likely to get engrossed in a story, and they want to continue reading. And it was librarians who would push some of the biggest books. It was librarians who would push Dogman. It was librarians who would push New Kid. It was librarians who would push Narwhal and Jelly. It was librarians who were pushing Babysitter's Club. And they really honed into the fact that these are full stories. They have full plot points. They have dynamic character development. They have complex narratives, and they have conflict. And they just also have beautiful art that encourages the imagination and supports the development of the story. And so what I love is that kids were able to go to their local libraries, or in some instances, for some of those titles, they were able to go to their scholastic book fairs in their school, and they were able to go, and librarians were the first to really hone in on the fact that this is a category that is worth having a section in for kids. And so I think a lot of people don't realize just how much librarians can make a category, and they keep it going. And so I think we are always going to be in support of our librarians. And we were always not only just supporting them actively on the sales side, but we market to them, we provide them with assets, we make sure that they get full access to as many titles that are applicable to them as possible, because we believe in the power of libraries.
Thank you for that, Tyne. The two other slides I have talking us through publicity and marketing and the distinction between their work in reaching readers and what sales does. This is material we're going to cover in our marketplace section for sure. And so I see how many of your questions are here, and I'd love to make sure that we get to cover them. So if our panelists are okay with me foregoing this particular part and getting to our audience Q&A, I will stop sharing and ask Grant to join us with the questions that you have answered. Hi, Grant.
It has been such an honor to listen to all of your incredible answers and simultaneously drinking from the fire hose that is this chat. We have an enthusiastic and curious bunch, so I will jump right to some of the questions that we have. I know that we're going to be talking about this in future sessions, but there were just so many questions asking specifically about, like, how do you find the right agent, or how do you go about getting started with an agent? So I know we will be talking with agents in later sessions, but just to kind of cover that question now, does anybody have any words of wisdom on finding the right agent or thinking about fit, just from where you all sit on the publishing side of the fence?
I'm happy to take that one on. So this came up a little bit earlier about checking the acknowledgments in the books that you read, because oftentimes the grateful author and illustrator mentions their agent. And let's say you love Grumpy Monkey and you see that the authors have acknowledged their agent, and then that way you can just, I mean, it's not rocket science. You just go to the website of the agent and see their submissions policy. You know, it helps to be a little organized, right? You keep a list, etc. I mean, it's that basic. Obviously, there are conferences where agents attend, but, you know, not to make anyone sad, but oftentimes we say it is as hard to find an agent as it is to get published. So there are some tricks, though, to make it just a little bit less time consuming.
And this space happens to be one of them. Again, knowing that we will have a moment to actually, I'm sorry, but it's true. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited, because in 20 years of working here, we haven't done this before. Actually say, you know what, we want to acknowledge and create a moment as the publisher to connect writers with agents. We talk a lot about demystifying this, and some of our colleagues have had open submissions programs, right? So you can just submit directly to an editor, but to lose access to the agent who can help you transcend that single publisher dynamic, who can advocate for you across multiple books and multiple outlets, that's really special. And instead of, you know, paying to attend a writer's conference and maybe get on an agent's radar, you're doing that here, and it's an honor to provide that for you.
I also will say, if you are a writer, you should make sure that you're following the major trade press and trade blogs, because that's another great resource to be able to find out this information, right? So Publishers Weekly, Publishers Lunch, Shelf Awareness. Those are three of the biggest, and they often have articles that speak to different types of agents and different types of really great information that is useful. So I would say, again, yes, acknowledgments, please. I live and breathe by the acknowledgments. You can find out a lot in those acknowledgments. You can also find out a lot in the index of a book. But also make sure that you're subscribed to the major trade press.
So I just wanted to say I love everything that I'm hearing about this, because it's the question I think I'm asked the most. And what I also think is important is for people to understand that you can have a sense of choice. You can talk to multiple agents and figure out what's the right fit for you. And just like any process, just like we talked about at the top of our conversation, that you're trying to figure out what's the right publishing model and the right publisher for your book, the agent is a really integral part of that. That's why I call it the care team. when I meet with authors and they say, oh, why should I pick you? I'm meeting with all these people and everyone's awesome and everyone's telling me how great my book is. And, what is it about you that would make it so that we should work together? And I always say, this is going to be a long and intimate relationship. I want to know when you make your decision that I'm the person who you want as your editorial champion on your best day and your worst day. And if that is the truth, then we should work together. And I feel that that's the question that people should ask themselves when they are also considering agents, because I'll often see people think, oh, well, I need to work with XY agent because of sort of tangible bullet point things that they see that, oh, they had X bestseller or Y bestseller that they might think is the right comp for their book when actually there might be another one, but they might not be the right sort of style for the nature of how an author wants to work. Maybe there might be someone on their team who might be the person, or maybe there might be some other people you could talk to so you can really have a deep sense of what you need and if you can supply that with each other in a long, healthy relationship. So I feel it's important to say that. And then, what I always say to my beloveds about it, because I love my agent, is you have to know that your agent has a bigger vision for you than you have for yourself. If that is not what you see, then maybe there's another agent that you need to keep talking to. My agent comes up with things she thinks I can do all the time. And, she's a sister, so I'll be like, girl, what? You think I can do that? But then I think, oh, you thought I could do that thing I couldn't do. And then we did it and you got me a deal. So that's just another thing I just really want to share. That agent has to believe in you and see you and really get you to have it be the best thing.
I love that, Jamia. Thank you.
Those are some great pieces of advice. So another round of questions that we had from people, there's a few questions that came in around just kind of asking for our opinion on book bans and how that impacts our perspective on acquiring books. I know any of us are happy to jump in and vehemently oppose book bans from the highest mountaintop. I already dropped the link to our Banned Books Hub in the chat. But yeah, Tyne, take it from here. Here's the mic.
I hate book bans. Stop it. They are horrible. They are no. So it's an unequivocal no. And thankfully, I work for a company that is actively involved with fighting book bans. Penguin Random House has been instrumental in filing legislation and actually just won a court order in Austin fighting against book bans. I think when what's great from a sales perspective, speaking fully from the sales perspective, we are seeing more diversification, not just in the content that retailers are carrying, but specifically on the independent bookstore level, we're seeing more diversity in ownership. We're also seeing incredible engagement in local communities. Our indie bookstores and our libraries are on the forefront of fighting book banning in this country. They are working within their local communities to really make sure that they have massive banned book displays in the front of the store, and they are highlighting those books. They are bringing in authors when local school districts are not are fighting against carrying those books. And I think it is absolutely critical. It is absolutely pivotal to see, and it's so encouraging to see the work that's being done on the local level. I think when one of the biggest examples I think of in the fight against book banning is, again, working with comic shops. Last year, Mouse, which is an incredible graphic novel written by a man that details a Holocaust story. And so it got banned. It got banned in the state of Tennessee, and a local comic shop decided that they were going to actively oppose it and actively fight against it. And they partnered with a nonprofit org to buy copies of the book and to ship them out to any school, any teenager, I believe, who wanted to read it. And they ended up buying thousands of copies of it. So it is just this type of activism and fight that I think is what we need to see to combat this, because we are in publishing. We don't believe in censorship of any kind. And we believe in the telling of these stories. We believe that every story does need to be told. It doesn't mean that every story needs to be told by us. But the same way there is a book for every market, there is a publisher for every book. It doesn't mean that you should ever censor the voice at all. So I just want to say that about book banning.
Amen, Tyne.
If I can add quickly to what Tyne just shared, it also ties into library and love of library. So there is quote unquote content in Dear Martin, and oftentimes we get complaints about the language, like no teen ever used, a curse word. But when there's a scene in the novel, and to this day, Nick says to me, "I can't believe you let me keep that in." I'm like, that's the crux of the novel. I'm not going to share anything else, but we know that scene is why this book, Nick is from Georgia, her own home state. There were districts that banned the book. And here's what we did. We consulted with the library in the school district. They invited Nick to speak to the kids. And of course, we donated books. So any young person who wanted to read Dear Martin, but couldn't because the school took the book off the shelves, thanks to the sanctity of the library, we were given a safe space for Nick to talk to her readers. Sadly, that actually happened a couple years ago, but because of the mission at Crown, we publish a lot of books with stories, novels that somehow end up on this list. And it just reaffirms for me that we need these books and children need to have these books. One of our transgender authors, he could decide, should he write middle grade or YA? And he said to me, you know what, there's even less for middle grade children. When I experienced what I went through, I was really young. I didn't have a book. If I'm able to write middle grade, would you publish it for 8 to 12-year-olds? And that's why we published Obese Man Enough. And yeah, that one has been banned. So we know what's happening, but we know how we can help our authors and the children that need these books.
Fabulous. So happy to hear about the support and glad to know it and glad to shout out from the rooftops any chance we have an opportunity. Book bans are evil. Freedom of speech should reign supreme. We have some questions about some particular subgenres, and I'd just love to hear any tangential kind of commentary on these. We had a couple people asking a little bit about some of the nuances and difference for your pitch or proposal process if you're writing nonfiction, and a couple people who are asking specifically about poetry. So I know that's no one's kind of square space necessarily on this panel, but I'd love to hear any of your thoughts or opinions to just support those folks who are publishing into those spaces, because they're both incredibly important and a really important part of meeting readers' needs, as well, as we all well know.
I can speak to that. So I think when it comes to poetry, I think it's really important to think strategically about the agents you're pitching and the editors you're pitching to see how they have published poetry and the kinds of poetry they've published, and then also see how that publishing for that poetry was positioned and marketed, because it's different sometimes in terms of finding that audience, etc. So a lot of times you'll see that there's some people I know who are in poetry, but then they do nonfiction that's very different from their poetry, and they will sometimes work with outside specific poetry publicists because of that, because it has its own community inside the community. That's not something that's necessary, but it's just something that I find really interesting, that that and certain other subgenres sometimes have, their own strong communities and grassroots connections that come with that are interesting to explore and consider. And then with the nonprofit, the nonfiction nuance that I think about a lot is I want to know, when someone's talking to me about their book or pitching it in the larger proposal, why you, why now, so what, and how will this be evergreen when the next generation reads it, if this is going to be backlist. So for example, yes, timely books are very important, But sometimes there are things that people will send in and they will say, oh, did you think that that wasn't strong? Because I thought that the idea was super timely and I thought it was great. And I'll say, oh, I think this would have been a really good long form magazine piece about this issue, but it needs to be connected to a bigger, wider vision, for it to be connected for culture shift or change in the discourse, for it to be a book that defines generations. And that's just the sort of thought problem that I think is important for the artist to engage as you think about what the best format is for your art and for your work with nonfiction. So whenever I have people who I'm talking to, again, like loved ones who will tell it to me and I'll say, okay, wait, you're so what? I need a little bit more to get a little bit sticky for me. It's all sizzle, no meat. Give me some more meat. Just keep working on that, because you will get more clear every time you can ask that to yourself. And when you know what the why you, the why now, the so what, and why I am the exact right voice for the subject, then you're ready. All you have to do is map that out, give it a skeleton, and fill it up with the meat.
You're the best, Jamia. I'm sorry to jump in. I just have to answer this from two genres in particular. One, because I did have the pleasure of working with Dr. Angelo over the course of her life. And when I started here, Dr. Angelo and Billy Collins were the only poets that Random House published at the time. And so there was a point where, and the same for like essay collections, unless your name was David Sedaris or Sloane Crosley ultimately came into that space, or Michael Chabon, we were telling you those things don't sell, and there weren't editors here who were going to be able to support storytelling in those formats. That's no longer true. And Jamia pointed out those poets who have actually transcended that particular genre to do longer form nonfiction. My favorite of that, Hanif Abdul-Rakib, who is a genius, brings the poetic form to long form nonfiction. Writers like Claudia Rankin, who are telling essay, but lyric essay. And so it's kind of this hybrid genre. It goes back to what Jamia was saying, voice will win. And now, because our efforts to diversify storytelling, to diversify our staff and our interests, we're able to promote such a wider variety of genres. So do think about, again, what your message is, what it is that you and only you have to say the way that you do, who the people are that are going to receive that, and then how you want to communicate that. Could be in poetic form, could be in a lyric essay form. Right now, it could also be in a card deck form. I'm sorry, you'll get these shameless plugs for gift products from me over time. It is a wonderful space where niche is not a bad word. I love interactive formats like cards, like journals. They're not banning card decks, at least not yet. So if we can adapt book content into those formats, we can still keep some of those more controversial messages out there and serving people. So just wanted to put that out there. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, Grant.
Great. There are plenty of questions. Well, I'll pick 2. One of them I think is kind of a bubble up of a lot of what a lot of people are asking. And I know that we will talk a little bit more about the nuances and differences between self-publishing and working with a publishing house and the benefits. But I think there's a lot of people who have their feet in both circles. Like maybe they've self-published or they self-published on Amazon and they're kind of not sure what to do next. And just any advice on people who maybe like dabbled in self-publishing and are looking, just like any broad strokes on the differences or how that pipeline might work. I think that might answer people's questions. So any thoughts there would be very welcome.
Well, one thing we have found is the agents are also looking for talent, and they are going through the self-published genres and looking like who has attracted the most customers. And oftentimes, if you self-publish and then you get discovered by an agent, then the agent approaches you, offers to represent you, and then that agent helps you to land your deal at, Joe Publisher. So that actually happens more often than you would think. I think maybe there might even be some instances where an author may be prolific and they choose to self-publish and they also have a deal with the publisher. I mean, what's exciting is we are still in this moment where really anything goes, and it's good to be open-minded and flexible.
It's a great piece of advice, Phoebe. I can't help but think of Laura Olympus when I think about the self-publishing to traditional pipeline. Sorry, Portia, go ahead.
Oh, that's a great one, Grant. Keep it current, because I was going back what I realize now is 20 years, and that was really breaking my heart, to the rise of streetlit and traditional book publishing. So when I got here, there were a number of authors like Nikki Turner and Tashonda Whitaker who demonstrated their success reaching their audiences with content that was coming from the same neighborhoods that were celebrating and creating rap music. And they were successful selling books out of the trunks of their car because they were pulling up to where those people wanted to be engaged in the act of buying books about what was going on around them. So those are authors that were like, if you can sell 100,000 copies out of the trunk of your car, welcome to Random House. We will help you sell 500,000 copies, not just out of the trunk of your car, but also at Barnes and Noble. So, and that was, you know, with one of those, once there is a strong comp, then it could become that kind of trend. So yes, to that self-publishing question as a point of opportunity that will attract other publishers and also help keep out some of the, I don't know, the gatekeeping apparatus that we're trying to work through and around, right? If you self-publish and you attract an author that way, that is the same as writers like, oh, the rules do not apply. I'm blanking on her name, Ariel Levy, right? Who writes an article and it's published in the New Yorker and she gets a book deal, or Andrea Elliott, who writes Invisible Child for the New York Times as a 7-part series and she gets a book deal. Well, you might not have access to the New Yorker or the Times, but you do have the ability to create your own book, and it can, with your voice being strong, your writing being strong, your networks being strong to also help drive that word of mouth, then you can attract the attention of an agent and an editor. Just had to add that, sorry.
You are a hard act to follow, especially because you said streetlit, and my brain immediately went to Truth to the Game, which was just 14-year-old time. It was, I loved it. I do want to call out and just piggyback off of what Grant said. So Grant used a great example of Laura Olympus, right? Laura Olympus, most people forget, wasn't traditionally self-published. It wasn't published on Amazon. It was published as a webtoon. It was a webcomic. So I think it's also remembering that there are different avenues for self-publishing. It doesn't all have to look the same. It's about finding something that is authentic and true to what you are trying to do, and absolutely recognizing that they can coexist. Laura Olympus was the #1. It is actually the #1 webcomic on Webtoons. It's also a best-selling graphic novel that has been best-selling since it's come out. It's one of our top-selling graphic novels. It performs beautifully. And the content is the same. It's just the audience is so voracious for the book, both in digital form. They're also want it in physical form. So there's a great kind of halo effect that has occurred where they're willing to engage in the content in whatever way they can get it. So I think it's not just about recognizing that self-publishing can look different. It doesn't all have to be the same. You can find different avenues for how you self-publish, whether you do it as an audiobook, a digital webcomic if you're a graphic illustrator, or going the traditional ebook or physical route.
Thank you, Ty. Amazingly, we are at time, and I knew this was going to go fast, but not this fast. And I'm really glad that we will have some additional time together in the sessions to come. I know that one of the questions that's kept coming up is whether this is recorded and will it be made available? Absolutely. So please stay tuned for more of that. No homework. Homework is a bad word to me. And yes, I'm an editor. That's a thing. So no, but we look forward to, again, creating more opportunities for you to use the inspiration that you're hopefully receiving in these sessions and put that to good use in getting your own work out there in the world. Thank you again, Matt. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Tyne. Thank you, Jamia. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Pat and Kate. And absolutely thank you, Tamira, for all of this. I cannot wait to see you all again. Our next session will be October 5. We will have some different panelists here with us, but I'll still be here. Tamara, was there something you wanted to say before we depart?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to echo everything that Portia just said, and I want to thank all the panelists for really pouring your heart into this session. You all left no stone unturned. And my guess is if we had 5 hours, you would have been filling those 5 up with gems. So just thank you from the bottom of our heart for that. I also just want to thank the attendees, like the energy in the chat. It's just on 1,000, right? And it's for that reason that we're here. The way that you all consistently show up, you give energy to the things that matter to us, to our community, is the reason why this door was opened. So we need for you to keep that energy high. Make sure that you tell a friend to tell a friend that we're here and that we have various sessions that'll take place between now and through December 6th. And then we also have a special surprise coming up in Q1 of 2024 that we'll keep you all informed about. A few housekeeping things because we're seeing it come up in the chat. So the first thing is make sure that you all whitelist info@womeninwords.com. So all of the emails that you get regarding your registration credentials will come from there. We will send the recording out to you all. We will also send out the slides, and the way that you'll receive that is via email. So make sure that you have our email address whitelisted, and you can look at that on our website again. We also want to make sure that you all follow us on social at Women in Words 2023, because it'll give you all an update on speakers and any other special announcements that we have coming up. If you all were among the first 1,000 registrants, you will receive the free toolkit. That will be delivered to the address that you registered with on file in October. It seems like there's quite a bit of energy above the 1,000, so we'll do our best to make that available for purchase. And then finally, we will send out an email so that we can collect the information for every single author that is in this program. I had no idea that we had that many authors already. And I think what we're hearing is that we want to be able to support one another. So we'll formalize that process. We'll send out an email. We'll allow you to put your details in it, and we'll be sure to amplify that work throughout this program and beyond. So thank everybody for your extraordinary energy and excellence. It's been an honor and privilege to serve you in this way. And we look forward to seeing you again on October 4th, right? Same time, same place. Portia.
Time, same place. Thank you. Yes, October 4th. And thank you all. Truly, it is beyond a privilege to be in front of you and to serve you and to support you in what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful night.
Have a good night.